After my husband's funeral. I didn't mention the $2 million inheritance or the house in Italy. Coming home from the funeral, I heard my mother-in-law say, "Pack your bags and get out. You're placius on the street." I silently nodded and made my decision. But before I begin, let me ask you to like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you, and enjoy listening. I met George 35 years ago at the factory where we both worked. I was 22, he was 27. He was an engineer in the project department. I was an accountant in the finance office. I remember that day distinctly. Early September, Indian summer. I was standing in line at the factory cafeteria, holding a tray with soup and a cutlet. In front of me was a tall young man in a light shirt, blonde-haired, with a straight back and broad shoulders. He took 2 portions of side dishes and turned around. Our eyes met. "Excuse me," he said, "did I get in your way?" "No," I replied. "Everything's fine." He smiled, and when he smiled, I felt something flutter inside me. His eyes were gray, calm, kind. Walked to the tables. I sat with friends from accounting. He with colleagues from his department. But throughout lunch, I felt his gaze on me. Several times I raised my eyes and saw that he was looking at me. He would look away, but then look again. After lunch, I headed back to accounting, climbing the stairs, when I heard behind me, "Wait!" I turned around. That same young man was catching up to me, jumping 2 steps at a time. "Forgive me," he said, slightly out of breath. "I wanted to, that is, I thought." He faltered, blushed. "Could you, if it's not too much trouble?" He hesitated a bit more, then exhaled and said quickly, "May I know your name?" I smiled. "Hope." "Very nice to meet you." "George." He extended his hand. I shook it. His palm was warm, firm. "Hope, I know this might seem strange, but would you agree to go to the movies with me on Saturday, for example?" I should have said no. I had a boyfriend, Mike, whom I'd been dating for 6 months. But when I looked into those gray eyes, all thoughts of Mike somehow evaporated. "Yes," I said. "I agree." His face lit up. "Really? Excellent. Then let's meet at the Victory Cinema at 7 in the evening, that there's a good war movie playing." Agreed. We met on Saturday. George arrived 15 minutes early, standing at the cinema entrance in a dark suit and white shirt, holding a bouquet of carnations. When he saw me, his face broke into a smile. "Hope," he said, "you came. I was afraid you'd change your mind." "Why would I change my mind?" "I don't know, I was just afraid." He handed me the flowers. Red carnations, 5 of them, wrapped in newspaper. "Thank you," I said. "They're beautiful." We went to the movie. The film was about war, about tank crews. George watched attentively, and I watched him, his profile, how he frowned intently during tense scenes, how he relaxed during calm ones. After the movie, we walked through the park. It was a warm evening. The leaves on the trees were just beginning to turn yellow. We walked along the path, talking. George told me about his work, about the projects he was working on. He spoke passionately, his eyes burning. You could see that he loved what he did. "And you," he asked, "do you like working in accounting?" "Yes," I replied. "I like numbers. They're precise, clear, not like people." He laughed. "That's true. People are more complicated." We reached the fountain and sat on a bench. George pulled a chocolate bar from his pocket, broke it in half, handed it to me. "Help yourself." We ate chocolate and watched the fountain. Jets of water rose up, shimmering in the rays of the setting sun. "Hope," George said suddenly, "may I come find you in the cafeteria at lunch and walk you home after work?" "If you don't mind, of course." I looked at him, at those serious gray eyes, at that shy smile, and realized I was already in love. "I don't mind," I answered. From that day we met every day. George walked me home after work. We strolled through the city, went to parks, to the movies, to the theater. On weekends we went boating, rode bicycles out of town. Daddy gave me flowers, wrote notes, called in the evenings. My previous boyfriend quickly realized things were bad. He made a scene, yelled that I was a traitor, that he devoted so much time to me, and I'd left him. But I had no regrets. With George, it was different, easy, calm, reliable. 6 months after we met, George invited me to visit his mother. I was terribly nervous, changed clothes 3 times, reapplied my lipstick, rebraided my hair. George laughed, said I was already beautiful, that his mother would definitely like me. Evelyn lived in a 1-bedroom apartment on the outskirts. Small, cramped, with dark wallpaper and old furniture. She met us at the door, gave me a long, appraising look. "So you're Hope," she said. "Come in." We sat at the table. Evelyn had prepared a modest dinner. Potatoes, herring, pickles, tea with cookies. The conversation didn't flow. She asked questions. I answered simply. "Where were you born? Where did you study? What do your parents do?" "My parents are teachers," I explained. "Dad teaches math, Mom teaches English. They live in Albany." "Teachers," Evelyn snorted. "So poor." "They live modestly," I answered carefully. "Modestly," she repeated and looked at her son. "Georgie, are you sure this is your choice?" "Mom." George frowned. "Don't start." "I'm just saying," the mother-in-law shrugged. "You could have found someone better. From a good family with money." "Hope is from a good family," George said firmly. "And I don't need money. I need someone I'll be happy with." Evelyn remained silent, but you could see from her face that she wasn't pleased. After that dinner, I cried half the night. George comforted me, said that his mother was just worried. That'd get used to it, would grow to love me. But I felt she would never accept me, till we got married a year after we met. The wedding was modest, about 40 guests, a restaurant at the community center, a bouquet of white chrysanthemums. My parents came from Albany, sat at a separate table, felt awkward among the city dwellers. Evelyn sat at the wedding looking grim, hardly talking. When George and I approached her for her blessing, she gave me a heavy look and said, "Well, Georgie has chosen. Let's hope he didn't make a mistake." At the time, I didn't think much of it. It seemed to me that any mother worries when giving her son into someone else's hands. Over time, she'd get used to it, would love me. How wrong I was. After the wedding, we moved into a 1-bedroom apartment on the outskirts. Small, 600 square feet. 3rd floor, no elevator. Combined bathroom, tiny kitchen. But for us, it was a whole world. At least it was ours. We were happy. George worked from morning to night, took on additional projects, consulted for private firms. I kept house, cooked, did laundry. And on weekends, we walked around the city together, went to movies, made plans. We didn't have much money, but it was enough. Evelyn came to visit us every Sunday without warning, without calling. Just appeared on the doorstep with a bag of groceries and a displeased face. "Georgie, you've lost weight," she'd say, appraising her son. "She probably doesn't feed you properly." "Mom, everything's fine," George would reply. "Hope cooks wonderfully." "Wonderfully," the mother-in-law would snort. "I can see how wonderfully. Skin and bones." She'd bring cutlets, pies, soups in jars, put it all on the table and tell me, "Here, Hope, learn. A man should be well fed." I stayed silent, smiled tensely, and went to the kitchen to wash dishes. George asked his mother not to interfere, but Evelyn didn't listen. She believed she had the right to control her son's life. After all, she'd raised him alone. Without a husband, George's father left the family when the boy was 3 years old. Just packed his things and disappeared. Evelyn was left alone with a child in her arms, without money, without support. She worked 2 jobs, saved on everything, invested every penny in her son. He was the meaning of her life, the only one. And when he got married, she perceived it as betrayal. 3 years after the wedding, we got a 3-bedroom apartment. By that time, George was already working at a large construction company, managing projects, earning well. We got the apartment through a program for young professionals. About 1,200 square feet in a new building, a residential area, but with good infrastructure. We were happy as children. For the first time in our lives we had spacious housing. Our own bedroom, living room, office for George. We did the renovations ourselves. Hung wallpaper, painted walls, assembled furniture. Evelyn came every day, criticized every detail. This wallpaper is too dark. Why did you get such a sofa? It's impractical. This should have been done differently like this. George was patient. I was patient too. When the renovation was finished, we had a housewarming party. We invited friends, colleagues, relatives. Evelyn sat in an armchair in the living room and received congratulations all evening, as if it were her apartment, her achievement. And when the guests left, she stayed behind. "Georgie," she said, pouring herself tea, "I've been thinking. I have a small one-bedroom. It's uncomfortable, and you have 3 rooms here. Maybe I should move in with you? It would be easier for everyone." George froze with a cup in his hand, looked at me, then at his mother. "Mom," he began carefully, "but we have our own plans. We want well, you understand, children, family, children." Evelyn interrupted. "And will I be in the way? On the contrary, I'll help. I'll be a grandmother. I'll babysit the grandchildren." "Mom, we're not ready yet," George said firmly. "Let's have you stay in your apartment. It'll be better for everyone." The mother-in-law's face turned to stone. She put down her cup, stood up. "I see," she said through clenched teeth. "Your wife is against it. She doesn't want your mother living with you. What does Hope have to do with it?" George protested. "This is my decision." "Yours," Evelyn smirked. "Of course yours. Before you always listened to me, and now you obey her." She left, slamming the door. After that, she didn't call or come for 2 weeks. George was worried, wanted to call to make peace. I tried to talk him out of it, but he still called, apologized, though he wasn't guilty of anything. Evelyn graciously accepted the apology and again began coming every Sunday. Years went by. We lived, worked, saved money. We didn't have children. I couldn't get pregnant for a long time, went through examinations, treatment. Doctors said there were chances, but small ones. George supported me, said we'd manage, that children weren't the main thing. The main thing was that we were together, but Evelyn thought otherwise. "Hope," she'd say at every meeting, "you do understand that my son wants children. You're obligated to give him an heir." "We're trying," I'd answer restrainedly. "Trying," she'd snort. "So many years have passed, and the result is 0. Maybe the problem is with you." George would intervene, ask his mother not to meddle in our personal life. But Evelyn wouldn't stop. She believed she had the right to know everything. When I turned 35, I came to terms with the fact that we wouldn't have children. George came to terms too. We stopped talking about it, stopped hoping, just lived on. Evelyn perceived this as my fault. She became colder, more distant, stopped bringing pies, stopped being interested in my affairs. She communicated only with her son, as if not noticing me. I wasn't offended. It was easier for me when she ignored me. In those years, George began traveling a lot. His company was involved in large projects across the country and then abroad. He flew to Italy, Spain, Germany, consulted developers, negotiated deliveries. He earned well, very well, but we lived modestly. We bought an ordinary car, nothing prestigious. We bought inexpensive clothes. We went on vacation once a year to Florida or California. George said that money should be saved, invested, accumulated for the future. I didn't ask for what future exactly. I trusted him, and then 11 years ago he returned from another trip to Italy and said, "Hope, I bought a house. Want to see photos?" I couldn't believe my ears. A house in Italy, he showed me pictures. A 2-story building with a terracotta roof, white walls, green shutters, a garden with olive trees, a terrace overlooking the hills. Inside, spacious rooms with high ceilings. "This is ours," George said. I bought it for 200,000 euros. I had savings, I'd been investing, saving, and it worked out. Now we have a house in Southern Europe. I didn't know what to say. 200,000 euros. Where did he get that kind of money? George explained. For many years, he'd been getting percentages from deals, consulting private clients, investing money in stocks and bonds. Everything legal, everything honest. He just didn't talk about it, didn't want to show off, didn't want anyone to know. Does even Mom not know? I asked. Especially Mom, he nodded. Hope, I love her, but she doesn't know how to keep secrets. If she finds out, tomorrow all the neighbors will know, all the relatives, and I don't need that. I understood him. Evelyn truly didn't know how to keep quiet. She loved to brag, tell everyone about her son's achievements. If she'd learned about the house in Italy, it would have become the main topic of all her conversations. And what will we do with the house? I asked. I'll rent it out through an agency, George answered. Tourists will rent it. Not much money, but steady. And we'll go there once a year, rest. We went to that house once. It was 10 years ago in September. 2 weeks I'll never forget. Whooped through the narrow streets of the town. Drank wine on the terrace. Watched sunrises in the garden. George hugged me and said, Hope, this is our place. When we retire, we'll move here for good. We'll live quietly without fuss. I believed him. I waited for that day, but we didn't tell Evelyn anything. George made up a story that we'd gone on a regular European tour. The mother-in-law listened to stories about the trip and curled her lip. Traveling abroad when there are so many beautiful places in the country. After that trip, life went on as usual. George continued to work, travel, earn. I retired at 62, but didn't get bored. I took care of the house, read, met with friends. George and I went to theaters, exhibitions, had dinner together every evening, discussed the news, made plans for the future. Evelyn aged. She was already over 80. Her health weakened, but her character remained the same. She still came to visit us, still criticized, still believed that her son owed her everything. George took care of her, paid utility bills, bought medications, called doctors. I didn't object. She was his mother, his obligation. I kept my distance, didn't interfere in their relationship, and then 5 years ago, George made a will. He came home in the evening, sat next to me on the couch, and said, Hope, I need to tell you something. He told me that he had an account in a Swiss bank, that there were $2 million there, that this was money accumulated over 20 years of work, that he wanted to make a will so that if anything happened, I would be protected. Protected from whom? I asked. From my mother, he answered directly. Hope, I know her. She believes that everything I have belongs to her. If something happens to me, she'll try to take everything, the apartment, the money, the house. She'll leave you with nothing. But she's your mother, I tried to object. She can't be that cruel. She can, George said firmly. I know her better than you. She loves me, but she's selfish. For her, the main thing is herself, her interests, her well-being. You're nobody to her, just a woman who took her son away from her. I didn't want to believe it, but deep down I understood he was right. Evelyn had never loved me. She tolerated me because I was her son's wife. But if George weren't around, she'd get rid of me without regret. What do you want to do? I asked. Make a will, George answered. I'll leave the apartment to my mother. Let her have housing so she can say I wronged her. But everything else, the house, the money, the car, I'll leave to you. You, Remy wife, you've been by my side all my life. You deserve a dignified old age. We went to a notary. Robert Morrison was a friend of George's from university, a reliable man. Had drafted the will competently, took into account all the nuances, certified it with a seal. George signed the documents and left them with the notary for safekeeping. Hope, he told me when we left the office, if something happens to me, go to Robert Morrison. Heck knows everything. He'll help. Don't be afraid of my mother. Don't listen to her. You'll have the house. You'll have the money. You'll live a dignified life. Don't talk like that, I asked. You'll live a long time yet. I hope so, he smiled. But just in case, you need to be prepared. He was right point 3 days ago on Thursday morning. I got a call from George's work. An unfamiliar female voice said that my husband had lost consciousness right in his office, that they'd called an ambulance, that Hugh is in the hospital, that I rushed there in half an hour. I was too late. George was already gone. The doctor told me it was a massive heart attack, that they tried to resuscitate him but didn't make it in time, that he didn't suffer, that everything happened quickly, that I stood in the hospital corridor and didn't understand what to do. I called Evelyn. She screamed into the phone, sobbed, demanded that I come to her immediately. That I came. She sat in the kitchen, red from tears, wailing, "My boy, my Georgie, how could this happen? How?" I hugged her, tried to calm her, but she pushed me away. "It's all because of you," she yelled. "You drove him. He worked for you, for your whims. If not for you, he'd be alive." I didn't argue. I just left and drove away. The next 2 days passed in some nightmarish fog. Organizing the funeral, processing documents, calling relatives, buying wreaths. Evelyn commanded everything, gave orders, yelled at me if I did something wrong, and today we buried George. We stood at the grave under a gray sky, listened to farewell words, threw handfuls of earth on the coffin lid. Evelyn sobbed loudly, leaning on her nephew's arm. I stood nearby, dry and frozen. There were no tears. There was only a cold emptiness. After the funeral, I did mention the $2 million inheritance, or the house in Italy. Coming home from the funeral, I heard my mother-in-law say, "Pack your bags and get out. Your place is on the street." I silently nodded and made my decision. The decision was simple and cold, like the autumn wind outside the window. I didn't argue, didn't cry, didn't beg. I just nodded and stepped aside, letting my mother-in-law into the apartment that 3 days ago had been my home. Now Evelyn entered here as the rightful owner, threw her black scarf on the hanger, and loudly commanded relatives, "Come in, don't stand in the doorway." I was 57, my husband was 62 when his heart stopped right at work. "Heart attack," the doctor said. Quick, without suffering. I got the call on Thursday afternoon, and by Friday we were already standing at the grave. Everything happened so quickly that I didn't even have time to fully comprehend the loss. On that Thursday I was at home, cooking lunch, planning to make George's favorite dish, braised chicken with mushrooms. He'd promised to come home early, wanted to watch some football game. Was cutting potatoes, frying onions when the phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello, is this Hope Morrison?" "Yes, speaking." "This is calling from Sterling Construction Company. Your husband, George Morrison." Then I listened as if through cotton wool. Words came in fragments. "Lost consciousness. Ambulance. City hospital. Come immediately." I turned off the stove, grabbed my purse, ran out to the street, caught a taxi. The driver said something to me, but I didn't hear. I looked out the window, clutched my phone in my hands, and repeated Tommy Self. "Everything will be fine. Everything will be fine. Everything will be fine." At the hospital, I was met by that same woman who called, a secretary from the reception area. Pale, confused. "Hope Morrison, I'm so sorry. The doctors did everything they could, but where is he?" I interrupted. "Where's my husband?" "Come with me." I was led to some office. A doctor sat there, a man about 40 in a white coat. He stood up when he entered. "Are you George Morrison's wife?" "Yes." "Please sit down." "I'll stand." "Tell me." The doctor sighed heavily. "Your husband was admitted to us at 11:20. Massive myocardial infarction. We immediately began resuscitation, but unfortunately he didn't survive. Official time off death, 11:48. I'm very sorry." I stood and looked at him. Didn't cry, didn't scream, just stood. Inside was emptiness. "Can I see him?" "Of course, I'll take you now." George lay on a gurney, covered with a sheet. His face was calm, as if he were sleeping. I approached, took his hand. Cold, that I stroked his hair, his cheek. "George," I whispered. "How could this happen? We were planning to do so much more, go to Italy, celebrate our 40th anniversary together. How? He didn't answer, just lay there, silent and distant. I don't remember how I got home. Don't remember how I called Evelyn. I only remember her screaming the phone. What did you say? My son? No, it can't be. She arrived an hour later, burst into the apartment, red, swollen from tears. Where were you? She yelled at me. Why didn't you watch him? Why didn't you call the doctor earlier? Evelyn, he was at work, I tried to explain. I couldn't have known. Couldn't have known, she interrupted. You should have felt it. You're his wife, you should have. I was silent. It was useless to argue. She was looking for someone to blame, and that someone became me. The next 2 days turned into a series of small humiliations and painful duties. Evelyn took over organizing the funeral, but she coordinated every step as if I were the last fool. Are we ordering wreaths or not? She'd ask. Of course we are, I'd answer. And do you have money or should I pay? I have money. Well, look, don't say later that I didn't warn you. Funerals are expensive. She brought some agent from the funeral home. A fat man in a black suit laid out catalogs on the table with coffins, wreaths, fences. This coffin is oak for $1,000. This one simpler, pine, $1,500. Which will you take? Evelyn looked at me expectantly. Oak, I said. Are you sure? The mother-in-law asked. That's expensive. George deserves the best. Deserves, she snorted. Well, if you're paying, take whichever you want. The agent nodded, wrote things down, showed more. Wreaths, ribbons, musical arrangements, everything cost money. And with each item, Evelyn frowned more and more. Why do you need music? She asked. It's fine without it. I want it to be dignified, I answered. Dignified, she muttered. Didn't help him when he was alive, but now you're putting on a show for the dead. I clenched my fists under the table, but stayed silent. It wasn't the time to sort things out. The funeral was set for Saturday. Friday evening relatives started arriving. George's Aunt Helen brought pies and salads. His cousin Eric came from another city with his wife and daughter. Neighbors stopped by, brought flowers, expressed condolences. Evelyn sat in the living room and received everyone like the lady of the house. She talked about Herson, cried, wailed. I bustled in the kitchen, made tea, laid out treats, washed dishes. No one paid attention to me. I was just the help at this wake. Eric came into the kitchen for water, saw me at the sink. Hope, how are you? He asked quietly. Fine, I answered, not raising my eyes. If you need anything, reach out. We'll help however we can. Thanks. He left. Eric was a good person. Too bad he lived far away. The night before the funeral, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. Next to me was the empty space where George had always slept. His pillow, his blanket. I reached out my hand, touched the sheet. Cold. In the morning, I got up early, dressed in the black dress I'd bought the day before. Simple, no decorations. I gathered my hair in a bun, didn't put on makeup, looked at myself in the mirror. Pale face, dark circles under my eyes, tired look. A widow. 89 in the morning, a bus came for us. Evelyn sat in the first row, I next to her. The other relatives filled the remaining seats. We rode in silence. Someone sobbed, someone looked out the window. About 50 people gathered at the cemetery. George's colleagues, friends, neighbors, distant relatives, everyone in black, everyone with flowers. The priest performed the service. People said goodbye, threw flowers into the grave. Evelyn sobbed so loudly she could be heard in neighboring sections. She fell to her knees at the edge of the grave, wailed, "My son, how could you leave me? Who will take care of me now?" Eric and his wife lifted her up, led her aside. I stood and watched the workers fill the grave with earth. The thud of clods on the coffin lid echoed in my head. Thud! 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 Then we went home for the wake. Only now, watching my mother-in-law take charge in our apartment, did it start to sink in. My previous life was over. The relatives settled in the kitchen and living room. About 25 people came. Aunts, uncles, cousins of my husband, neighbors, colleagues. Aunt Helen, the sister of George's deceased father, settled on the couch. A large woman over 70 in a dark suit with a big brooch on her chest. She held a handkerchief in her hands and from time to time sniffled. "Victor would be crying now," she said, meaning her deceased brother, burying his son. "It's not right. Children should bury parents, not the other way around." Next to her sat her daughter Melissa, a woman about 45 in an expensive black dress and gold earrings. She worked at a bank, earned well, and always emphasized it. "Yes, Aunt Evelyn," she addressed my mother-in-law. "This is a terrible grief, but you're holding up well. You have to live on, no matter how hard it is." "Easy to say," Evelyn responded. "But how? On what? My pension is pennies. My health isn't what it used to be." "But there's the apartment," Eric noted, George's cousin. A tall, thin man with thinning hair. "That's a good apartment in a nice neighborhood. You could sell it. Live comfortably in your old age." "I'm not going to sell it," the mother-in-law snapped. "This is a memory of my son. I'll live here." I mechanically poured tea, put out treats on plates. On the table were salads, cold cuts, hot pies. Aunt Helen had brought her signature cabbage pies. The neighbor Lydia had brought potato salad. George Scaligs from the office brought a cake from the bakery. "Hope, what kind of salad is this?" Melissa asked, poking her fork into a bowl. "With crab sticks." "Yes," I answered quietly. "And I thought there should be something traditional at wakes, like kutya, pancakes." "There are pancakes, too." I nodded toward another dish. "Oh, well, okay then." She took a portion of salad and returned to the couch. I continued laying out food, and I felt like I was in a dense cocoon of cotton wool. Voices came through muffled, faces blurred. The neighbor Vera, an elderly woman from the apartment across the hall, approached me in the kitchen. "Hope, dear," she said quietly, "hang in there. I understand how hard this is for you. George was a good man." "Thank you, Vera," I answered. "If you need anything, let me know. We've been neighbors for so many years." She squeezed my hand and returned to the living room. A kind woman. Always helped. Always interested in how we were doing. George's colleagues sat in a separate group by the window. 3 men in strict suits, serious. Restrained point one of them, David, was the department head where George worked. "George Morrison was an excellent specialist," he told Evelyn. "One of the best engineers I've worked with. We're all in shock from this news." "He spent his whole life disappearing at work," the mother-in-law replied. "That's what he worked himself to." "Evelyn, he just loved his work," David carefully objected. "It was his calling." "Calling," she snorted. "And when was he supposed to love his family, his mother, his wife?" David fell silent, not knowing what to answer. George's nephew Stephen, Eric's son, a guy about 20, sat in the corner with his phone. He'd come to the funeral, but spent the whole day staring at the screen. Young people, his mother Irene, Eric's wife, helped me in the kitchen. A pleasant woman, calm. "Hope, let me help you," she said. "You're already tired." "Thank you, Irene." We laid out dishes together, heated up cutlets in the microwave. Irene was silent, and I was grateful to her for that. I didn't want to talk, discuss, explain. Evelyn sat at the head of the table, in her deceased son's place, and received condolences, as if she were the widow, not me. "Evelyn, hang in there," a large woman in a black suit told her, a distant relative, I think a second cousin. "You're so strong, such a good person." "What can you do?" the mother-in-law answered, dabbing dry eyes with a handkerchief. "Life goes on that I have to somehow arrange things for the future." I stood by the stove and listened. Arrange things for the future. What was that about? About me, about the apartment. Evelyn hadn't once in these 3 days asked how I was feeling. Hadn't hugged me, hadn't said a kind word. But she constantly gave orders. "Don't go there, don't touch that, don't do it that way," as if it were hired help, not her son's wife. Hope, she called loudly. Where's the tea? People are waiting. I took the teapot, carried it to the living room, poured it into cups. My hands moved automatically. Melissa held out her cup. 3 sugars for me, she said that I poured in sugar, stirred it with a spoon, served it. And give me cookies, Melissa added. I brought a plate of cookies, set it in front of her. Thanks, she tossed out, not even looking at me. The wake dragged on painfully long. They talked about the deceased, remembered stories, laughed through tears. Aunt Helen told how George, as a child, caught fish at the pond. Once he fell in the water, she laughed. Came home all wet. Evelyn scolded him, but Victor said, It's okay, Mom, at least he caught a carp. Eric remembered how he and George went hiking as young men and got lost in the forest. We were so scared then, he said. Spent the night in the forest. Thought that was at the end. And in the morning we came out on the road. Turned out we were just half a mile from camp. David told work stories. George Morrison was always punctual. Never late, never let anyone down. I took on a task, he'd see it through. I sat in a corner and was silent. My husband was a good man. We lived together for 34 years. He worked at a construction company as chief engineer. He earned decently but never bragged. We lived modestly. A 3-bedroom apartment in a residential area. An inexpensive car, vacation once or down south. An ordinary life of ordinary people. Hope, why are you silent? Melissa suddenly asked. Tell us something about George. Everyone turned to me. I was confused. He was a good husband, I said quietly. Caring, attentive. But that's obvious to everyone. Melissa waved it off. Tell us some interesting story. I tried to remember something suitable, but my head was empty. Once we went to the beach, I began, and George decided to learn to snorkel. He dove in and the mask came off. He was so scared, jumped out of the water all red. A few people smiled politely. Melissa nodded. Yes, funny. She was clearly expecting something more interesting, but I didn't have the strength to make up stories. Enough reminiscing, Evelyn intervened. Let's properly commemorate him. She raised a shot of vodka. The others followed her lead. I poured myself water in a glass. To the repose of George Morrison's soul, the mother-in-law pronounced. May he rest in peace. May he rest in peace, the others echoed. Everyone drank. Some had a bite. Some just put their glass down. Pour more. Eric asked. Pour, Aunt Helen nodded. 3 times according to tradition. He poured vodka into the glasses. The second toast was made by David to a good man, an excellent specialist, and a faithful friend. They drank again, then a 3rd time. Then people began to gradually leave. They said goodbye, hugged Evelyn, shook my hand. Hang in there, Hope, some said. If you need anything, call. Others said, be why evening only the closest remained. Evelyn, Eric with his family, and Helen. They sat in the kitchen, drank tea, talked in low voices. Be why 7 in the evening the guests began to disperse. Evelyn remained, sat in an armchair, took off her shoes, rubbed her feet. I'm tired, she said to no one in particular. So many people, so much fuss. I cleared dishes from the table. My hands moved automatically. Plates in the sink, cups in the dishwasher, crumbs in the trash. Evelyn watched me appraisingly. Hope, she called that I turned around. We need to talk. About what? I asked quietly. About the apartment. About the future. Sit down. I wiped my hands on a towel and sat opposite her. The mother-in-law looked at me with a cold gaze. So here's the deal, she began matter-of-factly. This apartment, by law, passes to me. I'm George's mother. I'm the first-line heir. But I'm his wife, I objected. Isn't that me? Wife, she interrupted. You were his wife. Now you're a widow, and I'm his mother. And I have more rights. I consulted with a lawyer, so don't argue. I was silent. My heart was pounding somewhere in my throat. Therefore, Evelyn continued, you'll need to vacate the apartment. I understand you need time, but let's not drag this out. 2 weeks and you move out. 2 weeks. I repeated, Evelyn, but where will I go? That's your problem, she shrugged. You'll rent a room, live with friends. You have a pension, you'll manage somehow. I need this apartment. I'm going to sell my 1-bedroom and move here. The neighborhood's better here, and the subway's close. I looked at her and couldn't believe my ears. She was talking about this so calmly, as if discussing buying a new refrigerator. Kicking out her son's widow 2 weeks after the funeral. For her, this was completely normal. Evelyn, I began, trying to stay calm, but maybe we can work something out? Maybe I could stay here, pay for part of the apartment, or… No, she cut me off. I'm not going to live with you. I need the whole apartment. Pack your bags and get out. Your place is on the street. These words hit me like slaps. Your place is on the street. That's how you talk to the homeless, toe beggars, to people who don't matter. I'd lived with her son for 34 years, been her daughter-in-law for 34 years, endured her nagging, her coldness, her constant dissatisfaction. And this is what I got in the end. I silently nodded. Okay, I said quietly. I understand. Evelyn raised an eyebrow in surprise. Apparently she expected tears, a scene begging. But I just stood up. Well, aren't you a smart woman? She said, leaning back in her chair. I knew you were a reasonable person, not like some who cling to other people's property and ruin normal people's lives. She took out a notebook and pen from her purse. Let's make a list now of what things you'll take, so there won't be disputes and misunderstandings later. A list. I repeated. Well, yes, you understand you can't take everything. Furniture, appliances, dishes, all that stays. You only take personal items. She opened the notebook, prepared to write. So, your clothes, that's obvious. Shoes too. What else? I stood and looked at her. She was seriously going to make an inventory of my possessions, as if I were a tenant, not the owner of this home. Photos, I said quietly. Our joint photos with George. Which ones exactly? She narrowed her eyes. Well, where you're together. But where he's with me, with relatives, those stay here. Those are family heirlooms. They should be in the family. Okay. Next. You can take your bedding. What you brought with you once. And what was bought here already stays. All the dishes stay. Pots, pans, plates, all mine. But we bought those together with George. I tried to object. Bought with his money, she cut me off. So it was his, now it's mine. All furniture stays too. Couch, bed, wardrobes, tables, chairs. Can't touch anything. She wrote something in the notebook, muttering. Appliances stay too. TV, refrigerator, washing machine, microwave. Everything stays. George's books stay too. That's his library. I'll preserve it as a memory. And my books? I asked. You can take yours. What do you have? Well, a few shelves. Novels, mysteries. Take them. Just make sure you don't mix them up. I know which books George had. She continued writing. I stood and listened, feeling everything inside turn cold. Jewelry, Evelyn suddenly said. That's a separate topic. What jewelry do you have? Well, earrings, chains, bracelets. What George gave me for holidays. That's right, she nodded. What he gave, those are gifts for my son. They should stay in the family as a memory of him. But they were meant for me, I tried to object. These are my things. Meant for you while you were his wife, the mother-in-law answered harshly. Now it's a memory of George. I want to preserve everything connected with him. Maybe I'll pass it on to grandchildren later, if any of the nephews have children. Evelyn, I began, trying to stay calm, but this is absurd. This is my jewelry. I wore it all these years. You wore it, she agreed, and now you'll give back. Don't argue. This isn't up for discussion. She wrote something in the notebook, then raised her head. Personal electronics, phone. Maybe you have a tablet? Take that. Your cosmetics. Hygiene products do. Take those. Household chemicals stay. Products from the refrigerator by agreement. What you brought yourself, take. The rest stays. I listened and couldn't believe it. She was even dividing the food. One more thing, Evelyn said. You'll turn in the apartment keys when you move out. All sets. Don't even think about making copies. I won't, I answered. And one more thing. She looked at me carefully. George had some savings. Money. My heart skipped a beat. I knew what she was getting at. I don't know, I lied. He didn't tell me about finances. Strange, the mother-in-law drawled. A husband and wife didn't talk about money. I don't believe it. He must have had something. Deposits, savings. If there was anything, it's in the bank. I'm not in the loop. Well, we'll see, she muttered. Tomorrow I'll go to the notary, find out what's what with inheritance. Maybe some accounts will show up. She closed the notebook, put it in her purse. So, Hope, tomorrow I'll come with a realtor. We'll look at the apartment, evaluate what's what. Maybe I'll start planning renovations. Don't get in my way, okay? Sit in your room, pack your things. Okay, I nodded. Well, that's good. So we've agreed. I'm leaving, I'm tired today. She stood up, put on her coat, wrapped a scarf around her neck. And don't be too upset, she said in parting. You're still young, you'll manage. Maybe you'll find someone, get married again. Life goes on after all. I was silent, she left. I closed the door behind her, turned the key, leaned my forehead against the cold wood, closed me eyes. You'll manage. Get married again, life goes on. Evelyn took away my home, my belongings, my memories of my husband, and at the same time gave advice on how to live. I slowly walked into the bedroom, closed the door, leaned my back against it. It was hard to breathe. I went to the window, opened it wide. Cold October air burst into the room, and it became a little easier that I looked down. There in the courtyard, the lights were on. Someone was walking a dog. Someone was returning from work. A woman with a stroller hurried home. A teenager on a scooter rode past. An ordinary evening of an ordinary day. And my life had turned upside down. I walked to the bed, sat down, looked at the room. My and George's bedroom. This is where we woke up every morning. This is where we talked in the evenings. This is where we made plans. And now all this would remain with Evelyn. She'd sleep in our bed, rehang our pictures, throw away our photos that on the nightstand stood a frame. George and me against the backdrop of the sea. Italy, 10 years ago, the only trip to our house. We're standing, embracing, smiling. George in a light shirt, me in a summer dress. Behind us blue sky, white clouds, hills covered with vineyards that I picked up the photo, ran my finger across the glass. George, I whispered, what should I do? How should I handle this? He looked out from the photo, smiling, and suddenly I remembered that conversation 5 years ago when we made the will, that we were sitting on the same bed. George was holding my hand, looking into my eyes. Hope, listen to me carefully. If something happens to me, don't be afraid. You'll have everything you need. I've taken care of it, understand? I've thought of everything. Don't talk like that, I answered then. You'll live a long time yet. I hope so, but just in case you need to be prepared. I made a will. You'll get the house in Italy and the money from the account. Enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life. And the apartment. The apartment I'll leave to my mother. Let her have housing, but everything else is yours. Understand, Hope? If something happens, go to Robert Morrison. He's a notary, my friend. He knows everything that he'll help. And don't listen to my mother. She'll try to intimidate you, humiliate you, push you out. But don't give in. You have rights, you have protection. Promise me you won't let yourself be abused. I promise. He kissed me on the forehead. You're strong, Hope. Stronger than you think. If you have to, you'll manage. I put the photo back on the nightstand, stood up, went to the closet. On the top shelf behind shoe boxes lay a small jewelry box. I took it out, opened it. Inside were documents: my passport, marriage certificate, insurance policy, pension ID, and a business card. Robert Morrison, notary. Address, phone number. George gave me this card then, 5 years ago. Keep it, Hope. If anything happens, call him right away. Don't delay. Don't think about it, just call. He'll explain everything, handle everything. I took the card, turned it in my hands. Small print, gold embossing. A serious firm, tomorrow. Tomorrow morning I'd call. But now. I put the card back, closed the box, hid it on the shelf. Not yet. Evelyn should think I was broken, that I agreed to everything, that I meekly accepted her conditions. Let her think she won, let her relax. And I'd prepared that I undressed, lay in bed, pulled the blanket over me, closed my eyes. But sleep wouldn't come. I lay and stared into the darkness. Thoughts swirled in my head. 2 weeks. I had 2 weeks to organize everything. Call the notary, find out the details of the will, process documents, gather things, find tickets, fly to Italy. To our house, where it's warm, where it's quiet, where no one would tell me what to do. I imagined that house. The terrace overlooking the hills, morning coffee to the rustle of olive trees. Sunsets painting the sky orange and pink. Silence. Peace. No Evelyn, no her claims, no her cold gaze, no her constant dissatisfaction. Freedom. I don't know when I fell asleep. Just at some point consciousness switched off and I plunged into darkness. I woke up early. Outside the window it was still dark. I looked at the clock. 7. Evelyn promised to come after lunch. So I had time. I got up, washed, dressed. Put on a simple gray dress, a cardigan. Gathered my hair in a bun, looked in the mirror. Pale face, tired eyes, dark circles. An ordinary elderly woman. Nothing remarkable. That's exactly how Evelyn saw me. Gray, invisible, convenient for manipulation. Let her see me that way. I went to the kitchen, made coffee, sat at the table, took out my phone, found Robert Morrison's card in the box, dialed the number. Waited. 1 ring, 2, 3. Then a female voice. Morrison, notary office, good morning. Hello, I said. My name is Hope Morrison. I'd like to make an appointment with Robert Morrison regarding my husband's will. 1 moment, let me check the schedule, the secretary answered. What was the deceased's name? George Morrison. Yes, I see. Robert Morrison is expecting your call. Would 11 o'clock today work for you? Very convenient. Excellent. I've scheduled you. Do you know the address? Yes, I do. Then we'll see you at 11. Goodbye. Goodbye. I hung up, took a sip of coffee. The first step was taken. Robert Morrison's notary office was located downtown, in an old building with high ceilings and creaky parquet floors. George introduced me to him 5 years ago when he made the will. Then he told me, Hope, if something happens to me, go to Robert Morrison. He knows everything. He'll help. I went up to the 3rd floor, knocked on the door with the notary sign. A young secretary opened. Hello. I'm here to see Robert Morrison. My name is Hope. I'm George Morrison's wife. Come in, he's expecting you. Robert Morrison met me in his office. A tall, gray-haired man about 65 in a strict suit and glasses. He stood up from behind his desk, shook my hand. Hope Morrison, please accept my condolences. George was a good man. Thank you, I answered and sat down. I know why you've come, the notary said, taking a thick folder from the safe. George left a will. He warned me that if something happened to him, I should contact you. But you beat me to it. What's in the will? I asked, feeling my heart beat faster. Robert Morrison opened the folder, took out a document, handed it to me. Read it yourself. I took the sheet. The letters swam before my eyes. I blinked several times to focus, then read. I, George Morrison, being of sound mind and firm memory, bequeath all my property, namely, a house at the address Via Garibaldi 23, San Arcangelo di Romagna, Italy, monetary funds in a bank account in the amount of $2 million, as well as a car, personal belongings, and other property to my wife, Hope Morrison. The apartment at my current address I leave to my mother, Evelyn Morrison. I read it again, then again. George left me almost everything. The house in Italy, $2 million the car, and to his mother only the apartment, this very 3-bedroom that she wanted to kick me out of. He left me everything, I whispered. Almost everything, Robert Morrison nodded. The apartment really will go to his mother. That's his will, but everything else is yours. George spelled it out very clearly in the will. He told me he was afraid his mother would try to sue you for everything. That's why he divided the inheritance, so she wouldn't have grounds for claims. I sat and looked at the document. George took care of me. Even after leaving this life, he protected me that I remembered that conversation 5 years ago when he made the will. Hope, I don't want you to be left with nothing. My mother is a difficult person. She believes that everything I have belongs to her, but that's not true. You're my wife. You've been by my side all my life, and if anything happens, you'll have a dignified life. I promise. He kept his promise. What do I do now? I asked the notary. Wait 6 months. That's the period for entering into inheritance. I'll open an estate case. You'll file an application. Evelyn will file hers too. In 6 months, we'll process all the documents, and you'll officially become the owner of the house and the account. And she'll find out about the house, about the money. She'll find out, Robert Morrison nodded. When I announce the will, it's a mandatory procedure. All heirs must be present. When will that be? In a week. I've already sent the notice. I left the notary in some strange state. On one hand, I felt relief. I had a future. I wouldn't end up on the street, wouldn't be destitute. I had a house in Italy and money. Enough to last the rest of my life. On the other hand, I understood a scandal was inevitable. When Evelyn found out that almost all the inheritance went to me, she'd go ballistic. But you know what? I didn't care anymore. I returned home around noon. Evelyn was already there. She was sitting in the kitchen with some woman, drinking tea, talking. Seeing me, the mother-in-law pursed her lips. Oh, you're here. Hope, this is Linda, a realtor. We're discussing selling my apartment. The realtor, a plump lady about 50 with bright red hair, nodded to me. Hello. Hello, I answered and went to the bedroom. But I didn't close the door completely and could hear their conversation. So, Linda, Evelyn was saying, my 1-bedroom needs to be sold quickly. I want to get the money and invest it in renovations here. Everything here is old. Wallpaper, floors, plumbing. Everything needs to be replaced. I understand, the realtor answered. And who's currently registered in this apartment? My former daughter-in-law is registered, but she's moving out. In 2 weeks, she won't be here. Excellent. So the apartment will be empty. That'll make selling your 1-bedroom and renovating here easier. I listened and smiled. Evelyn had already decided everything, was already making plans. She didn't have in doubt that the apartment would go to her, and only her. And I wasn't going to disappoint her yet. The following days I lived as if in a fog. Evelyn came every day, brought either the realtor or a furniture appraiser or a designer. They discussed renovations, chose wallpaper, calculated estimates. I kept my distance, packed things, folded them in boxes, pretended I was meekly preparing to leave. And in reality, I was just waiting for the day when Robert Morrison would announce the will. That day came a week later. The notary scheduled the meeting for 11 in the morning. I arrived first, sat in the waiting room. About 10 minutes later, Evelyn appeared. She was in a strict black suit with a new hairdo made up. She looked solemn, as if she were going not to the reading of a will, but to Anna Ward's ceremony. Hope, she nodded to me dryly. You're here too. Well, that's good. Everything should be done according to the law. We went into the office. Robert Morrison asked us to sit down. So he began. I'll read George Morrison's will. Please listen carefully. Evelyn straightened in her chair, folded her hands on her knees. She was confident, absolutely confident. I, George Morrison, the notary read, being of sound mind and firm memory, bequeath the following, the apartment at my current address I leave to my mother, Evelyn Morrison. Evelyn nodded, satisfied. There it is. So the apartment is hers. I saw her relax, how the wrinkles on her forehead smoothed out. The house in Italy, Robert Morrison continued, at the address via Garibaldi 23, city of Sant'Arcangelo di Romagna. I bequeath to my wife, Hope Morrison. Evelyn's face twitched. She quickly glanced at me, then back at the notary. Monetary funds, the notary read on, located in an account at a Swiss bank in the amount of $2 million. I bequeath to my wife, Hope Morrison. Silence hung in the air. Robert Morrison raised his eyes from the document and looked at us. The automobile, Toyota make, personal belongings, jewelry, and other movable property I bequeath to my wife, Hope Morrison. The will was made voluntarily in the presence of a notary, certified by seal and signature. Evelyn sat pale as death. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Then she abruptly turned to me. What? She breathed out. What house? What 2 million? I was silent, just looked at her calmly. This is a mistake, the mother-in-law yelled, jumping up. It can't be. George wouldn't. He would have told me. Evelyn, Robert Morrison intervened. Please calm down. The will is legal. It was made 4 years ago. Certified by me personally. George Morrison was fully competent, of sound mind. Everything was done according to the law. But I'm his mother, she screamed. I raised him. I have a right to everything. By law, the notary explained patiently, the testator has the right to dispose of his property at his own discretion. You received the apartment. That's quite a lot. The apartment. Evelyn clutched at her heart. What apartment? A 3-bedroom in a residential area, and she gets a house in Italy and $2 million. She turned to me. Her eyes burned with fury and hatred. You, she hissed. You talked him into it. You controlled him however you wanted. You stole my inheritance. I didn't steal anything, I answered calmly. This was George's decision. His alone. You deceived me, the mother-in-law continued screaming. You both deceived me. I'll contest this will. I'll find lawyers. I'll prove this is illegal. That's your right, Robert Morrison said. But I warn you, there are no grounds for contesting. The will was drafted competently without violations. Evelyn paced around the office. Her face was distorted with anger. Her hands shook. Then she stopped, stared at me. You'll never get that money, she hissed. I'll do everything so you don't get a penny. I'll sue you. She didn't finish. Her face suddenly turned white. Her eyes rolled back. Evelyn swayed and collapsed to the floor. Robert Morrison jumped up, rushed to her, felt for a pulse. Call an ambulance, he yelled to the secretary. I sat in the chair, looking at my mother-in-law lying on the floor. I didn't move, didn't panic, just looked. Inside was a strange calm. The ambulance arrived quickly. The doctors examined Evelyn, measured her blood pressure. Shikimito opened her eyes. Blood pressure spiked, the doctor said. You need an examination. Will you go to the hospital? I won't go, the mother-in-law croaked. I'm fine. They sat her in a chair, gave her water. She drank, not looking at me, then stood up, swaying, and left the office without saying goodbye. That I stayed with the notary. Hope Morrison, he said quietly, you need to be careful. She might try to contest the will. Let her try, I answered. George thought of everything. Yes, he thought of everything. But be on guard. I went out onto the street. It was a sunny day, cold, clear. I stopped on the sidewalk, closed my eyes, took a deep breath, Freedom. That's what I felt. Freedom. I returned home. Evelyn wasn't there. I went into the bedroom, opened the closet, took out a suitcase, started packing things. Didn't hurry. Carefully, methodically. Clothes, shoes, documents, photos that I end the evening the mother-in-law called. I picked up the phone. Hello. Hope. Her voice was muffled, tired. I feel bad. Come over. Why? I need help. Evelyn, I said firmly, you yourself told me to move out. I'm moving out. I'm not obligated to help you. But I'm George's mother. You can't. I can, I interrupted. And I will do exactly that. Goodbye. I hung up. My hands didn't shake. My heart beat evenly. I felt neither pity nor guilt. The next day, I finished packing. Suitcases stood by the door. I walked through the apartment one more time, looked at the rooms where 34 years of my life had passed. There was a lot of good here. But now there was nothing left here for me. I called a taxi, brought the suitcases down. The driver helped load them in the trunk. Where are we going? He asked. To the airport. I answered. I bought a one-way ticket to Rome. I didn't need to come back anymore. I had a house in Italy, money in the account, and a whole life ahead of me. The plane took off in the evening. I went through check-in, checked my luggage, went to boarding, sat by the window, buckled up. Outside the window, a sunset was flaring up. The sky was orange, red, purple. The plane took off. The city remained below, small and distant. I leaned back in my seat and closed my eyes. I never saw Evelyn again. 6 months passed. I processed all the documents, got access to the account, entered into the inheritance. The house in Italy turned out to be even more beautiful than I remembered. I did a small renovation, arranged the garden, hired a woman from a neighboring village to help with the housework. Life here flowed slowly and calmly. I woke up with the sunrise, drank coffee on the terrace, looked at hills covered with vineyards. During the day, I walked around the town, went to the market, bought fresh vegetables and fruits. In the evening, I read books or just sat in the garden, listening to the crickets. This wasn't happiness, it wasn't euphoria. George couldn't be brought back, and the emptiness from his loss hadn't gone anywhere. But this was a dignified life. Calm. Mine. Sometimes I thought about Evelyn. I wondered what became of her. Did she sell her 1-bedroom? Did she renovate the 3-bedroom? Or does she still live there alone, in the apartment she fought me for? But these were fleeting thoughts. I didn't call her, didn't write, wasn't interested. She got hers, I got mine. Justice prevailed, just not the way she expected. I sat on the terrace, watched the sunset, and thought about George. I remembered how he hugged me, how he kissed the top of my head, how he said, "Hope, you're my support. Without you, I wouldn't have made it." He took care of me even after he was gone. He knew his mother would try to push me out, humiliate him, leave me with nothing. And he protected me. Thank you, George. Thank you for everything. The sun set behind the hills. The first stars lit up. I stood up, went into the house, closed the door. Tomorrow would be a new day. And it would be mine. This was my life, my freedom, my future. And no one could take it away from me anymore.